Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead here and get started. And Desiree, we're good on your end? Okay, thanks. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly regarding Port of Alaska Modernization Program update. It is Friday, April 7, 2023. We are scheduled from 1:50 until 2:50 p.m. today. It is 1:51 p.m. There are documents for the work session which are available online at muni.org/worksessions. We'll go ahead and start with Assembly member introductions for the record.
Felix Rivera.
Daniel Voland.
Pete Peterson.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Kevin Cross.
Meg Zalto. Suzanne LaFrance.
Robin Dern.
Randy Salt.
We don't have any Assembly members dialing in on the phone. Mr. Sweet and Mr. Constant have asked to be excused. We are also joined here in the room by members of the administration, particularly the port, and also members of the Geotechnical Advisory Commission. So we'll go ahead and have you all state your names, please.
I'm David Ames with Jacobs Engineering, the PAMP program manager.
John Daly with the Port of Alaska Engineering Manager.
John Thornley, Chair of the Geotechnical Advisory Commission. Kyle Brennan, Vice Chair, Geotechnical Advisory Commission.
David Hemstreet, Geotechnical Advisory Commission.
Carrie Nutter, Geotechnical Advisory Commission.
Okay, welcome. Thank you all for being here today. We also have the acting municipal manager, Kent Colhase, and the deputy municipal manager, Colby Hickle, here as well. We're going to treat this primarily as a special meeting of the Enterprise and Utilities Oversight Committee. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Zelatel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So really trying to get three things out of this work session today. The first is to follow up on a prior conversation we had at an Enterprise and Utilities Oversight Committee meeting around the seismic standard, particularly in context of the item that will be before us on the 11th around getting the designer of record on contract. I believe we left that conversation with the identified impasse, I guess I would say, and I'm hoping that by having the GAC here as well as the PAMP project manager and the port engineer, we can get to a meeting of the minds. Additionally, I know that they would like to talk with us about some changes to the administration building as well, but we're going to start with the seismic standard. And so I'm going to summarize where I understood we left off, but then let you all jump in. I really want to help through our questions facilitate a conversation to understand where we're at and how we can get to the next phase. So my understanding was that last time we talked about the seismic standard, the GAC's recommendation was repairable within 7 days. And the questions that were arising was, what does that mean? 7 days, does that mean the paint is dry and we're 100% operational? Does that mean we're some percentage of operational? Maybe the paint's still wet. It seems like there wasn't a lot of clarity on what that meant. And then it's now my understanding that the port is trying to propose potentially a different seismic standard than the one that was originally proposed by the GAC. So that's my understanding of the lay of the land. Is that seem correct, Mr. Ames? You look like you're ready to say something.
Yes, I guess in general, what there has been is there's been a standard and an interpretation of the standard that was recommended all the way back in 2014 and has been the standard through the design until now. What's happening now is that along with a change in the national standard, the port has requested, I wouldn't say a change in the standard, but a reinterpretation of the language of the standard to apply to the project. The details of that I'll let the seismic engineers discuss and the GAC discuss if you want to go that route. But effectively, we've got a design to the standard set in 2014. There, with this request to reconsider the standard, the designer of record contract includes an evaluation of the structural impacts of that and the potential cost savings in order to address that reinterpretation. Okay. With the addressing of that, with those design changes that would come with that, there might be cost savings, but there's also a reduction in resiliency and a few other costs and negative impacts that come with that. And so following the analysis by the designer of record, the city would be able to make a decision on whether the reduction in cost is worth the impacts that come with that reduced design. But the designer of record contract would be necessary to advance that study.
Yes, but I want to be clear, I think, as we go into that, to be clear on where the GAC recommendation is, and if they're, before we actually engage the designer of record, so we know exactly what the designer of record is actually evaluating for those potential cost
Okay.
savings. Because it was my understanding that the GAC's prior recommendation was being interpreted in a way that maybe wasn't fully in line with the intent of the prior recommendation. So I'm going to turn it over to the GAC at this point. I don't care which one of you, if you kind of want to tell us where your recommendation is right now as to the seismic standard, and what it means, because I think what it means is where we've gotten sideways with each other.
Sure, I'll go ahead and speak. I put together kind of a timeline to describe where we were in 2014. I've been on the GAC. I was chair of the GAC at the time that this was, so I have some historical context. So we'll talk a little bit about where we were in 2014, what our recommendations were and why they were such, and then I'll fast forward to where we are now, so that provide a little context of what we're looking at. So in 2014, we were coming off of a construction project that went sideways. We had a clean slate that was in front of us from the standpoint of getting a new designer or a new manager on the books to evaluate alternatives and look at feasibility of development of the port and all that stuff. And so, as the GAC, we were asked by the port to take a look at design standards that were being proposed and provide recommendations on whether or not they should be followed, if there should be any changes. And so that's what we did. We took a look at, the primary source of design standard that we were looking at was ASC 6114, which at the time was in draft format. It hadn't been finalized yet, but we were provided advanced copies of this, and we were using that as our benchmark for the design standard. And within that, you have a summary here that was provided. It shows you what this is a very, the very front part of the standard. It describes the seismic performance criteria based on the importance of the structure. In short, our recommendation was that we thought that ASC 6114 was an appropriate standard to design the port to. We had recommended that the design classification be a high design classification, or high importance, high performance. And with that, you can see here on this table, with that, you have 3 different earthquake events. For the low level event, the operating level event, it's minimal damage, controlled and repairable damage at the contingency level CLE event, and the design event is life safety protection. Now, because of the port's importance to the city and also the state at large in terms of providing cargo for the entire state, and the fact that there's no redundancy in the port, we felt that a little bit of a higher performance level was necessary. And so that is where we had the high +1, which is what our recommendation was, where we have minimal damage at both the operating and contingency level event, and then controlled and repairable damage at the design event, the high seismic event, and with an additional modification on top of that because of what not minimal, controlled and repairable damage. We had an additional caveat to that because of the way controlled and repairable damage was defined in ASC 6114. And if you look at it, it is, I believe it's outlined in this. Yeah. In that version of the standard, there was, controlled and repairable damage basically means it acts in a ductile manner. It's not, it doesn't collapse, but it's still standing. But there are repairs that here, this item B, that controlled and repairable damage is damage that requires repair that results in a loss of serviceability for no more than several months. And so when we were reading that, the way we interpreted that as a body, we said a loss of serviceability for several months. We can't have that because of how important the dock is, or the port is, to the state. And so that is when we decided as a body that we would require that an additional 7-day period be applied to that controlled and repairable damage, such that the port would be back up and running within 7 days. We didn't really have any nuanced discussions about at the time about how much serviceability was it. Was at full capacity? Was it partial capacity? Because at the time we were in the infancy of this discussion. No design had been done. We were looking at feasibility studies, and we just wanted to see what would work. So throughout that entire process, my recollection of the conversations we were having is all we were concerned about was serviceability. We didn't want the port to be out of commission and 100% not usable for 3-4 months. So fast forward to today, we have the PCT terminal that's been constructed out there. We've learned that the recommendations that we have made have been interpreted to be, practically speaking, that we have minimal damage at the design event, which is a bit of an unintended consequence of that recommendation, because designers are looking at that 7-week or 7-day period saying, well, the only way we can meet that is if we have minimal damage. And so while it's great from a sustainability point of view, you have minimal damage, that's great. There's a price tag that comes along with that. And again, all we were really concerned about was serviceability of the port. And so if you look at, the next iteration of ASC 61 is coming out here shortly. We have draft copies, draft language of that standard. And in looking at that language, which we anticipate will be adopted for the port as the design standard, they have a new definition of controlled and repairable damage. And in that, they have removed that statement that says the required repairs result in loss of serviceability for more than several months. And they've replaced it with two new items. And they say, the first point is that the deck does not experience significant damage, and pile damage is limited to an extent that no local collapses occur. So you basically have a structure that is still standing. And the second point is the structure may experience a temporary reduction in serviceability until inspection, evaluation, and/or repairs are performed, but maintains some level of serviceability. And so the way that language is stated, it really, in my opinion, speaks to what we were concerned about originally. We wanted to have, I don't think anybody was under the impression that under a design level event, we're talking a major event here, that no damage or minimal damage would occur to that port. Damage is okay as long as the port can be used. While it's, obviously there's going to be inspections that'll happen, make sure there's no major structural problems. But once those inspections take place and an inventory of the damage is made, we'll be able to continue using the dock and the port, maybe at a reduced capacity, but it will still be functional. And so, it's my opinion that had language like that been in ASC 6114, it's likely that we would, at the time, would have been comfortable with that and not had that additional 7-day period.
Okay.
Any questions?
So that makes sense to me. So that would put where does that put us in the chart? Because does the chart no longer apply because it's going to change? Would it put it in the high plus
1?
We would be at the high plus one, yeah.
High plus
So,
1,
yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Great. All right. I am sure there are questions, but I'm going to actually give Mr. Ames a quick moment to respond kind of to that conversation, and then we'll take questions so people have kind of both sides of the information.
Thank you, Co-Chair Zalato. And that is all in line with the scenario that Kyle outlined is what would be evaluated as for a cost, for design change and cost by the designer of record under this contract. And subsequent to that, and that would be compared to the design that has been completed, the preliminary design that has been completed under the previous standard or under the current standard. Following that, before deciding to proceed with that change, the port and the city will want to consider there will likely be a cost savings associated with that new design, but there will also be some costs, some non-monetary costs associated that, such as a need to redo the design, restart the permitting process, and potentially delay construction. There'd be obviously a slightly reduced resiliency to the port, and there would also be if damage did occur, the repairs would be more costly, correct? So the analysis that the DOR is doing will be associated with that cost, and with that, and in conjunction with that analysis, additional information will be provided about those other risks and costs associated with it, so that the port and the city could make the evaluation on whether to work with the new standard or whether to maintain the old one. Okay.
Great. Thank you for that. And with that, how long will that process take if once the designer of record is under contract?
If the designer of record goes under contract, if the contract is approved next week, the study would be completed in late June, early July.
Okay, great. Thank you. I believe we have Mr. Cross in the queue.
Yes, thank you. And I guess I'd love to go through your presentation here. I'm just curious, when you're looking at increasing design standards, have you considered, or was there a conversation regarding just identifying maybe not a complete design standard increase, or just identifying critical areas? For instance, since we've got multiple docking points, we build one to a much higher design standard, realizing that way we always have one, but one at the current design standard, just to mitigate the cost, but also make sure we have a section that can stay, that has a higher standard in case there is a catastrophic event. I mean, or are we just or the whole thing built to a much higher standard? I'm just looking at how we can achieve the goal of having a port that stays open, but mitigate those costs and maybe not upgrade as much as we anticipated. Thank you.
So the original GAC recommendation suggested that to that high +1 standard, one petroleum cement dock and one cargo dock should be designed to the standard, and then did not go further with the recommendations for the other docks. Following that, the design advisory board, which is made up of the users and the port and a member from the administration, they recommended building all of them to that same standard. So since that, and that was approved in 2021 in I think it's AO 2021 056. So at the moment, the design advisory board is recommending building them all to that same standard. It is certainly possible, and we have discussed it internally and with the port, of reducing the standards for, or using a lesser standard for a second cargo dock or the later petroleum terminal that would be built in phase 3. So those are certainly possibilities. But as of now, the design advisory board had recommended building them all to the same.
Ms. LaFrance. Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, and thank you all for being here as well. And a question first, just to make sure I'm clear to Mr. Brennan, and then a follow-up question, I think, to Mr. Ames. So according to this chart, the third line that says design classification high, minimal damage, controlled and repairable life safety protection, that's the minimum level required, correct, for the port? That would be considered per the code? Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah,
The top half?
yeah, you're talking about the top table, the
Yep.
third line of the top table.
So, and from there, I guess the second part of my question is, the GAC made a determination that it should be high +1, given the critical nature of the port, and then also included the 7-day repairable. And then that was interpreted, practically speaking, to actually be effectuated through high +2, minimal damage across the board
That is correct.
for all of the design earthquakes. Okay, thanks. And so I guess my question, and I understand too, the 7-day repairable may not have meant, okay, exactly in 7 days, it's going to be back online to 100% service performance capability, but may have also meant preparation. Or maybe, can you speak to like what the 7-day, just so I'm clear going into this?
Yeah. So the 7-day time period is something that we came up with and agreed on just through conversation, not really having we didn't have a nuanced conversation about the types of damages. We just, because there was within the original definition of controlled and repairable damage, there was 3 to 4 months that we could expect it to be down. We just wanted to put some sort of limit on it. And at the time, like I said before, is we were at the very beginning of this feasibility study process. And so we were just looking to see
Got
what
it.
work. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And so I guess my question is now, when we're considering the designer of record, and Mr. Ames, you had said a new design. So the design for the cargo docks so far has been at this high +2 level?
That's correct. The design of the cargo docks to this point has been designed to that minimal damage level. That's correct.
Okay. I am a little bit confused just because of prior conversations like with your predecessor, where I remember going through a pretty substantial design package that showed all the different components and features priced out. And so what % design then are we at? I guess maybe if I have clarity is like, where are we at in the design process with the terminals, with the cargo?
So,
Docks.
so we're at 30% design with the current design. Okay, the designer of record ideally would be intended to take a 30% design to 100% in construction documents. Okay, and just from a practical standpoint, when we're talking about minimal damage versus controlled and repairable damage in a port environment, obviously the seismic codes have one definition, but in a port environment, and when we're talking about what it means for a marine structure, minimal damage would be things, superficial damage to the deck that can be repaired relatively easily above water. Once we start allowing controlled and repairable damage, we may be talking about not just sub-aqua damage or submarine damage, but also sub-mudline, which is why it's not quite as easily repairable or can't be repaired as fast. So maybe that helps clarify what those differences in.
Thanks, that's helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anyone else? Oh, yep. Okay, Ms. Dern and then Mr. Solt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to ask just a little bit about what is excluded in this code, because I'm a little bit concerned that there's like a limit here on what the use of the port will be in the future because we're using this code as the standard. I recognize that we're sort of moving up our safety standards, but my understanding is that the port would not be able to be used in any way other than what you're intending. Is that true? I'm late to this conversation, obviously, but if you could explain a little bit about that to me.
In the case of the minimal damage, this highest standard, the idea would be that in that design earthquake, there would be minimal damage. It could be fully functional within a week. You know, well, again, we're getting away from the time frame because it's not all that or the time standard because it's not all that meaningful. But the idea that the port would be fully functional relatively quickly for all of its intended uses. And in the controlled and repairable damage, it would be in that lower standard. It would be generally serviceable. There might be some minor reductions in operating capacity, but it could be used to support both its general operation and any sort of recovery operations that would be necessary.
That makes sense. But a follow-up question, I'm talking about more how the code relates to loss of life. So in terms of usage, do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm just wanting to understand, does this limit us to that port being used for certain uses that don't have threshold of loss of life? Because as far as I understand it, this code is relative to whether or not there's going to be a certain amount of loss of life or not, and so it's for certain types of projects. Am I incorrect, or I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly?
I think I'm going to ask Kyle and his colleagues how that code is interpreted. But in terms of the port structures, I think that you are correct as far as the code goes when it's looking at building structures and occupied buildings. But in the interpretation of the port code, it's not connected to loss of life and evaluation of that. But am I incorrect in that?
Yeah, through the chair, I'd say that if you look at the actual table that's in the code book, that ASC 6114, at every category, low, moderate, and high design category, they all have requirement of life safety protection. So the expectation is at that 1,000-year earthquake, there would be no collapse and there would be no loss of life.
Mr. Solt?
Thank you. So going back to, I think what Mr. Cross was bringing up around building half the port to one standard and the other half to a lesser standard. So at least one side of the port would always be functioning. That then brings in the question, if I believe I'm right, AO 2021-056 has separate designs for each half, one for RoRo specifically for tote and the other for container for Matson. So if you were to go with the concept of sorry, I'm trying to cheat on your sheet, a high one and something else on the other sheet, on the other side, you would then probably need to standardize across both terminals, or no? So that Matson and tote could use the surviving terminal.
So terminal 1, okay, which is what the design of record contract is connected to. Okay, that's the Lolo terminal. If that is the one, that's the one that this evaluation is being done for. The terminal 1 could be much more easily adapted to the RoRo operation than the RoRo operation could be adapted to the Lolo operation. So there would be ways if terminal 2 was designed just for RoRo, there would be ways to modify terminal 1 to very easily accommodate it for RoRo in the event that terminal 2 went out of service. But I do want to emphasize that everything we're talking about here related to design of record contract is related to terminal 1, with the decisions on terminal 2 to be left for later.
Okay, so just to regurgitate and clarify or make sure I understand it. So terminal 1 would be built to the higher standard. It would be capable with some modification to serve both tote and Matson.
Yes, if there was a difference in standards between the two, it could be more. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to recap where I think we ended up, which is we've heard from the GAC that actually a new definition has come out or is coming out soon about controlled and repairable damage. That really puts us in the high +1 category with that new definitional piece that basically suggests, and this is me summarizing, the deck wouldn't collapse and there would be a temporary reduction of serviceability, but some serviceability would be maintained. Is there some way to get from the GAC that, I mean, I don't know if that's where you're at, if you need to have a meeting to vote that that's where you're at. We do have this before us on Tuesday night. What I would like to have happen is have that right along with the designer of record contract. So we are very clear on this evaluation we're asking to take place as to the standard.
Yeah, we've actually been working pretty hard on this, and we're drafting a resolution as such, and our final meeting for that is on Tuesday afternoon to finalize that. So we're
All right, we can work with that. We're used to that laid on the table kind of situation as a supplemental item. So we'll be prepared for that. And so I think that is the designer record conversation and the seismic conversation, unless there's anything else. I want to give Mr. Ames some time here to talk about the administration building and whatever other quick issues you might have wanted to catch. I know you had a whole PowerPoint and probably weren't quite prepared for this bit more free form, but I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair Zalato. I'm happy not to go through my slides, but I did want to mention before we get off the designer of record contract that the last time I was in here, I had mentioned that we were still negotiating the fees, and we did manage to arrive at an agreement to perform at a $10.75 million fee, which is within the contract budget. And so we're very happy with the price and the scope that's been negotiated, and so that should be on the award of this contract, along with completion of design in the first quarter of next year, should be on the agenda for the 11th. Okay. Now, the other issue was the admin building contract, and this is a request to increase change order authority from the $827,000 change order authority on the $8.3 million original contract. Progress is continuing despite the delays caused by demolition debris that was discovered as buried at the site. I think we discussed this in a previous session that debris which appears to be dumped there as rubble disposed of after the 1964 earthquake was discovered at the site. It was not picked up by the geotechnical investigations, but we issued a change order to remove that. But the excavation, the initial contingency change order authority of $827,000 was will be more than extinguished by the cost of that debris excavation and the disposal. In addition, there are scope changes and value-adding services that have been recommended by the port to expedite transition to the new building from the existing building. That is critical to the commencement schedule for Terminal 1 construction. A lot of people ask, well, why are we building the admin building first? Why aren't we building the docks? Well, the reason is because the current admin building is sitting on the old docks that are damaged and need to be demolished in order to build the new ones. So that's why the administration building is being built first. It's going to be, it should be completed by in the first quarter of next year, and March, April next year, it's the current administration building services should be moving to the new administrating building services, allowing us to begin demolition of the existing facility in the second quarter of next year. So all of these, the expedition of that of the transition to the new building is critical. And there are some scope changes, which I'll get into in a second, that are being proposed. They are services that need to be completed, but were originally planned to be completed under separate, smaller contracts following completion of the building that we're recommending adding to this contract to allow the work to go in parallel versus in series and help us achieve that schedule. And so the request for additional change order authority is intended to cover the above changes beyond the original contingency levels.
Okay.
And
Ms. Stern has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering, how do you come to your change order authority levels? I noticed it's 10%, around 10% here. You also have it at 10% on the Cargo Terminal 1. And I've seen that we've had to approve many change order authority increases, and I'm wondering how are you coming to the number, and is it something that we need to consider applying elsewhere as well?
so I'll go to I'm trying to move the page. I'm not sure why the slide's not moving. There we go. So I think I'll go to the page I think that you're looking at right now. Okay. So as long as I've been here, and I've been here a little over a year and a half, the 10% contingency is a standard contingency applied to most municipal construction contracts and design. Okay. And that allows for minor changes in approaches, in scope, in detail in design and construction. What you're seeing up there, and so the original 8.27 million came with a 10% change order contingency. That change order that contingency change order authority is not intended, and my understanding, to cover large changes in scope. Okay. It's intended to cover minor problems on the site, changes like that, delays, things like that. What you're seeing up there as change order number 1 and change order number 2 were not change orders authorities that needed to be approved by the assembly. Those were deductions from the change order authority. The 600 or the 69,000 was for a design for a feature of within the contract, for a consideration of a feature within the contract, a garage enclosure, which was ultimately not performed, but it was additional work that the contractor was doing. Change order number 2 includes the cost of the excavation that needed to be done, the debris excavation. Okay. We're coming back for a change order authority increase that basically covers the scope changes. Normally, we would expect to be able to do this contract with only the 10% change order authority, much like we would on the design contract. But in this case, we've encountered debris that was unforeseen, and so it's just adding to the scope that needs to be completed to complete the work. And then the other items that I mentioned are additional task orders that would have to be completed by the port under smaller contracts before moving in. And if we do them on this contract, it allows the work to go in parallel with the existing work, move forward. So this is not what I would consider typical of change order authorities on contracts. Does that help?
That is very good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stern. Mr. Volan, then Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, I'm looking at this, and it's a lot of money, and we all expect the port to be very expensive, and it's a critical piece of infrastructure. At the same time, I'm hearing in statements on public record, but also in personal conversation from members of our federal delegation, concerns about ballooning cost with the port. And so, looking at the scope changes, some of these things I can see, they are sort of immediate to me. Yeah, we have to excavate and remove the pile obstructions and find a place to safely dispose of them.
potentially, garage fire protection. If we have an insurer that requires that, well, we probably can't get out of that. I'm curious about the communications and security upgrades. So municipality IT requirements, if maybe you could unpack that word requirements. What exactly is required? Why is it required? Or is this something that is optional and preferred?
Okay, Mr. Vollen, on that specific item, the communications the admin building scope originally basically included for communication purposes. There were the port at the time did not have the detailed requirements. They had not compiled their detailed communications requirements, meaning the IT infrastructure that needs to go into the building, including the electronic security infrastructure, the badging systems, the door opening systems, all these things. So what was put into the admin building contract originally was just bare bones cabling in the walls, and then all the other infrastructure was supposed to be done under a separate contract. All the other, I guess, end of line infrastructure was going to be put into that contract. In addition, my understanding from the port is that MOA IT requirements have been substantially increased. IT and security requirements have been substantially increased beyond what they were a year and a half ago when the concept design was being put together, and have now been received and have now been reviewed by a consultant to the port who has put them together in a full package. If time were not an issue, our contractors to build the building would put the primary infrastructure in place, leave the building, and then the IT contractors would come in and the security contractors would come in and install everything. This is adding this to this current scope. So it is work that has to be done. It meets. I can't speak to the detailed IT requirements. It's just not my area of specialty. But we can certainly send over the specs if you need them. But my understanding is these are city requirements that have to be installed in city buildings. And therefore, whether they're put on this contract or whether they're done under a separate contract, they are required. And this just allows us to expedite schedule
Okay,
wise.
I think that's
Does
helpful.
that help?
Yep, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Bullen. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm wondering, are we anticipating or do we know if there's going to be additional debris that we may have to remove when we get to the construction of rebuilding the actual docks?
Yes, sir. That is certainly something we are considering now. We do have some upland work that will be necessary during the construction of the cargo docks, and there is no question that the information garnered from this project is going into consideration of that design.
So I take from that the answer is yes, we could very easily run into some additional expenses from debris that would need to be removed.
We would have additional expenses, but given the designs that will be taking place in isolated areas, I think we can manage I think we can minimize them by requiring certain types of foundations that would excavate that material anyway. And so while there might be some additional cost compared to the overall cost, it would be very minimal. And it would not be a shock, a surprise, and a change like on this contract.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Solt?
So just looking at the change order for the garage fire protection, can you describe maybe what those requirements are, and has anyone come back to the municipality to work with our insurer and maybe tell them to go pound sand?
So these requirements, again, are over and above code. These specific requirements are for the garage itself and are related to things, to fire hazards created by different battery types and the various uses of the garage. primarily consists of coating the walls, fireproofing the walls, the columns, everything. In terms of the discussion with, I believe, sorry. I believe the insurer is F&F. I'm not sure, but I do know that the port spoke with them and tried to push back. And I think along with the risk department, came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to be, that they had pushed as far as they could. There were definitely some reductions received. These were not the only requirements specified, but these are the ones that were not able to do that, not able to
Thank
be
you.
removed. Yep.
Okay, any other questions on the administration building scope and change order authority? It's my understanding that you won't yet see these items on the agenda. We'll be working with, it was intended that they would be on the agenda. We've been briefed on them. So we'll work with the administration either to potentially lay them on the table or at one of the special meetings scheduled. I do know that we are under a bit of a time constraint, particularly, I believe, with the designer of record contract.
That's correct.
All right, anything else from anyone? I really appreciate the GAC coming. I think we got some good clarity today, particularly running up against needing to do the designer of record contract. And so I really appreciate that. We'll look forward to your resolution on Tuesday. Anything else from anyone? Okay, Madam Chair, I believe that is it for this work session, at least as what we had planned.
Thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I want to note that there is one final work session for members today, and that is 3:30, tour of Lakeshore Hotel to housing conversion, which is open to the public. It's about a 10-minute drive away, 3009 Lakeshore Drive, to start at 3:30 p.m. And I just want to reiterate Ms. Zalatel's remarks. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for the clarification and the information, really helpful. And with that, we are adjourned.